So I think that we would classify our project as a traditional citizen science project, the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. And actually it was really founded by Michelle Prisby, who is sitting in this room as a master's project when she was a master's student at the University of Minnesota 15 years ago. The Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, from a scientific perspective, has the overarching goal of collecting long-term data on monarch egg and larval abundance and also on milkweed habitat. Basically, what we're doing is documenting temporal and spatial patterns in monarch abundance, temporal both within season and between seasons. Spatial patterns, how they vary between and within seasons in their use of their breeding habitat in the United States. Looking at mortality, so we get stage-specific mortality from the monitoring data that our volunteers collect, and also looking at qualities of sites that affect monarch breeding and recruitment into the population. We actually have about 1,000 sites that have been monitored. It depends on how we count them. The 700 is based on volunteers and not the fact that many are monitoring multiple sites. It started with volunteers in 1977, but we actually started it at the University of Minnesota monitoring several sites near our lab in 1996, so we have data from 96. So what I'm going to focus on here is not so much the scientific outcomes of this project, but the conservation outcomes. And I'm going to focus first on the volunteer activities that have occurred without a lot of support from us. It's just been things that they've done. So we've divided this into 3 categories. The first is land stewardship, and there I mean stewardship of the actual land that the volunteers monitor. So what we found is that their long-term engagement with their site supports what Karen Cooper called adaptive management practices. So the volunteers are actually trying out things on their site that will attract more monarchs and changing these in response to their observations of how monarchs are impacted by what they do. Another category of behaviors that our volunteers engage in is outreach and education. They develop expertise that empowers them to share their knowledge. A lot of them work with youth. You can see some kids monitoring right there. A lot of them give talks in public venues, and a lot of them speak to the media. And finally, environmental advocacy. When they monitor a particular site, their place, like Rick said, for year after year, they really notice the impacts that humans have, and they often advocate for preserving that site and other sites that they think would be good habitat for monarchs. So we actually get a lot of letters from them asking us to support their activities, trying to prevent another big box store or parking lot from affecting the site that they've been monitoring. The other big category of conservation outcome is the data, and I think this is something that we think about a lot when we think about the conservation impacts of our PPSR projects. Monitoring data have incredible value. Conservation programs require that we understand how human activities affect species assemblages, and populations, and we can gain these data by involving the public in collecting them. The monitoring data can be used both to assess the need for conservation actions and the impacts of conservation actions. And I think thinking of the overall value of the data, what's probably most important for the stewards of PPSR projects, the leaders, is to really ensure that these data are managed responsibly, that they're analyzed, and that they're published. Because if we don't do those things, the people that are volunteering their time really are wasting their time if we don't use their data well. So very quickly, sort of what we would like to do when we think about these projects or think about the conservation outcomes of our project. In the stewardship area, we're trying to figure out how we can explicitly incorporate adaptive management and the stewardship actions that people can undertake on their monitoring land into our recruiting, our training, and our communication to really share the outcomes of what the volunteers do in order to encourage more people to engage in these kinds of activities. We've been focusing a long time on promoting their outreach and education activities. We provide a lot of materials and support for these activities. We try to support media contact with the volunteers. For example, if reporter in Madison calls us about this project, we connect them with a volunteer in Madison, Wisconsin, so that they don't just talk to us, but they talk to the volunteers. We encourage and support them to conduct training. And here you see a group of kids working with a volunteer that have been monitoring monarchs and are obviously really enjoying that activity. And we also provide information in the advocacy area that the volunteers can use as ammunition in their activities.